The heat rose in steady waves off the tarmac, bending the air into a shimmer that danced above the concrete like a silent mirage. It clung to the skin and soaked into the fabric, making every breath feel like it passed through gauze. Beyond the row of hangars, jungle canopy swayed with distant rotors, their low rumble rolling toward the flight line in pulses. A pair of F-35Bs sat under the sun, their canopy glass streaked with sweat and static, as if the jets themselves had been left out too long in the open heat. Leah stood alone near Bay 2, clipboard tucked under one arm, eyes narrowed at the feedback terminal beside the diagnostics pad. The screen read, nominal. But she had her doubts. The throttle response logs from Echo 5 had been spiking during climb-out over the last 3 flights, just a shade over spec. Not failure. Not enough to flag, technically. But she'd seen that kind of jitter before, and it never smoothed itself out. Her pen clicked softly in her grip. The checklist forms on her board were already filled, annotated, and cross-verified. Still, she double-checked. Behind her, laughter slipped through the noise. 3 pilots stood under a patch of shade near the supply racks, flight suits half-zipped and postures casual. One of them, tall and sunburnished, nudged the man next to him and nodded toward Leah. "Redline Leah again," he said, not bothering to lower his voice. "She logs throttle lag like it's a legal deposition." "Librarian with a clipboard," the second pilot added, "probably files it in triplicate." The third one chuckled. She'd panic if a checklist page tore. Leah didn't look up. She made one more note, underlined it, and turned toward Bay 3. A dry gust pushed across the tarmac as she walked, lifting dust and catching the edge of her board. A top sheet peeled loose and fluttered toward the jet wash behind her. She turned to reach for it, but it was gone, sucked under the intake cone of a taxiing aircraft and lost to the dust. Someone laughed behind her. "That's one checklist down." She didn't respond. She pulled a second copy from the rear slot on her board and started over. Her gloves, clipped to her belt, stayed where they were. She adjusted nothing. A fuel crew member rolled by with a diagnostics cart and smirked as he passed. "HUD jumped on Tango 1 this morning," he said to no one in particular. Flickered like a nightclub. The same pilot from earlier grinned, probably Leah's bad vibes sinking through the avionics. Laughter again. Leah approached the panel for Tango 1. She'd already seen the flicker. Fraction of a second during boot, right as the interface drew power. She had flagged it last week. No one had followed up. She tapped her pen once against the board and moved on. A younger tech from support crossed her path near the backup tank. He paused when he saw her, adjusting the strap on his loader kit. "You still out here?" he asked. "Just running diagnostics." He hesitated, looking toward the pilots, then back at her. "You probably know more about those birds than they do." She didn't answer. She turned and kept walking. The tarmac shimmered around her, heat warping the world at shin height. She walked between rows of jets as they idled or powered down. Some of the canopies were fogged over from cooling systems. Others dripped condensation from static ports, forming slow puddles near their landing gear. Near the maintenance tent, 2 ground crew leaned against a utility cart, watching her. One said something under his breath. The other nodded. Neither of them laughed loudly, but the silence afterward said enough. She reached the diagnostics port for Bay 6 and rested the board against her side. Her boots were damp now, sweat pressing through the seams. The fabric of her flight pants clung to her knees when she moved. The only sound nearby was the slow hiss of turbine cool-down and the high, dry whine of insects near the jungle fence. She scanned the last line of telemetry from the previous sortie. Nose trim was holding, fan sync within margin, but the throttle ramp rate showed a pattern. She highlighted 3 lines, made a note, and clicked the pen closed. Near the far end of the line, someone muttered, "She couldn't pull pitch in a VR sim." Leah heard it. She didn't flinch. She stepped away from the port and turned back toward the hangars. No one moved to intercept her. No one offered a nod, or a word, or even a second glance. A low radio call crackled from a nearby jet, filled with background noise and static. She passed it without looking. By the time she reached the shade behind Bay 1, a new aircraft had taxied into position. The cockpit was fully sealed, canopy glass streaked with moisture from inside and out. The onboard systems blinked through startup, HUD catching the sun at a sharp angle. For half a second, the display glitched. Just once. Leah had already written it down. The diagnostics bay was different at night. The lights overhead hummed in a low rhythm, casting a pale gold wash across the floor and leaving the corners in shadow. Cooling fans whispered in the ceiling, and the air smelled faintly of solder and printed plastic. Clean, dry, and mostly forgotten. Leah moved between the terminals in silence, boots soft against the grating. This was the only time she could work uninterrupted. The main console accepted her login without protest. Her clearance didn't allow training anymore. But months ago, she had cloned the local environment and rebuilt the sim backend by hand. Every variable was entered manually, and every flight profile verified against archived logs. She didn't run these drills for practice. She ran them to survive something the manuals didn't cover. Her scenario tonight was the same as the last 57, an emergency descent from hover with locked throttle and no fan assist. She was trying to land an F-35B without thrust, relying entirely on nozzle angle and trim. It had taken her 6 months to stabilize the drop vector. She still hadn't perfected the recovery. In her locker, tucked behind a curtain of unmarked storage, her old gloves sat folded in brown cloth. The inner tag still held her stitched name, threadbare, but legible. On the shelf above, a pair of sim boots waited, clean, but unworn. They hadn't moved since her clearance was downgraded. The training locker key still hung on the inside hook, brass dull with time. 2 years earlier, Leah had submitted a throttle fault report during system validation. The F-35B's transition mode, when exposed to sustained thermal ramp and unclean air intake, could register a microsecond delay between throttle command and nozzle response. Under certain profiles, it created locked thrust with no manual interrupt. She had tracked it across 3 simulations and 1 real flight. The report was filed during a late quarter review. 8 chairs, 1 screen, and a whiteboard filled with acronyms. She brought her findings in triplicate and outlined the scenario clearly, but the lead engineer barely looked at her. A senior official used the phrase, disruptive over-analysis. By the end of the meeting, she knew the outcome. Within 2 weeks, her name disappeared from the pilot rotation. No one explained. Her assignment changed. Her clearance dropped. She was recoded as a systems tech and routed to ground diagnostics. After that, the air around her quieted. Some officers stopped acknowledging her. Others offered vague smiles and left conversations early. A few avoided her altogether. She didn't complain. She kept working. Her wall back at quarters held a hand-drawn trim diagram, pencil on paper, carefully preserved under a taped sleeve. It read, Manual override curve throttle lock descent. Each mark was dated. The margins were filled with revisions. Above the desk, a cork square held her flight maps, gridded and notated. She circled the vectors she had solved in red. No one else had ever seen them. Sometimes, after midnight, she would sit by the sim screen and flip through her print logs. She marked each one by hand, a thin black line down the margin when the recovery point improved. Some had 4 marks. One had 7. That one was folded into a plastic sleeve and taped inside her locker. The simulator beeped softly. She adjusted her seat, keyed in override, and started the sequence. The scenario opened with mild turbulence, flickering HUD, and partial fan failure. She adjusted pitch and began descent trim. Everything moved as she expected. She didn't flinch when the warning light blinked red. She had seen it too many times. The recovery curve held. She cleared the glide path with 2 meters margin. When the screen froze, it read 97.3. Not perfect, but close. She shut down the sequence and crossed back to the bench. From this angle, the sim pods looked like animals at rest, their surfaces polished and still. Each cost more than she'd earned in 5 years. None of them officially belonged to her. She logged her time in a notebook paper, ink, no backup, 31 minutes tonight. Last week, she had passed the lead engineer in the corridor. He didn't look at her. He simply moved aside. She said nothing. But later that night, she rewrote her trim sequence from memory and shaved 2 seconds off the recovery time. The silence didn't bother her anymore. It kept her sharp. No interruptions, no oversight, no one second-guessing her input. A few weeks earlier, someone had taped a printout to the crew locker Leah's still trying to fly ghosts. It stayed up for 3 days before someone quietly pulled it down. She never acknowledged it. She wasn't flying ghosts. She was preparing for when the others failed. That night, the diagnostics bay held steady in its hush. Her breath fogged faintly against the cool glass as she logged her final note. The screen flickered once, just for a blink, barely a shift. She had already written it down. Leah's workbench in the diagnostics annex looked more like a machine shop than a technical bay. The surface was cluttered with printed throttle profiles, rolled schematics, and coded notebooks marked with tape. A dry erase board leaned against the wall beside her, crowded with equations and sharp, angular curves drawn in red. At the center of it all was a hand-drawn descent profile titled Manual Nozzle Recovery Throttle Locked. Beneath the curve, she had penciled her goal in small block letters: 0 fan assist, full trim control. She sat back and adjusted her field tablet. It had no wireless access. She had stripped it deliberately. Everything she needed was stored locally: the logs, the feedback loops, the crash data. Her fingertips moved with practiced rhythm as she scrubbed through another replay of a degraded descent. The sim's HUD flickered on entry, just like she expected. The throttle froze at 61.0, then refused to respond. She had planned for that. The nozzle began redirect at 200 feet above threshold. Not clean, not lethal either. She marked the margin with a colored line, then saved the sequence under her initials. No one asked what she did with her evenings. Most assumed it was admin overflow or redundant QA logging. Her desk didn't face the entry. That helped. The handheld she modified to capture lag sequences looked like a standard diagnostics scanner. She kept it in a generic case, always within reach. During sim replays, she tapped it twice to tag anomalies and once to store freeze-frame offsets. At dusk, she sometimes stood outside the annex and watched the real jets take off. She never crossed the barrier line. She stood just back from the edge, where the pad sloped down toward the fuel trucks. From there, she could watch the nozzles cycle, feel the residual heat roll off the flight line, and listen to the chatter of pre-launch checks. It was easy to go unnoticed. Nobody expected the quiet one to be watching the blade angles. On one such evening, a young mechanic passed behind her, headed toward the loader carts. He slowed when he saw her facing the line, then followed her gaze. "Miss Flying?" he asked, not unkindly. She didn't look away from the jets, not the talking. He offered a half smile but didn't linger. He walked on, and she returned her focus to the launch pattern. The fourth aircraft in the sequence had a shallow yaw bias. It corrected too late. She recorded it. Her gloves stayed in her bag that night, folded into the same cloth she'd used during pilot training. She only wore them inside the sim, not out here, not where people could see. Inside the room, under cover of ambient fan noise, she could test without commentary. One briefing that week drew half the rotation into the ready tent. She sat near the back, just close enough to observe the mission updates. The pilot leading the talk made a passing joke while waiting for slides to load. "She should write a novel," he said, glancing at the front row. "Call it What If the Jet Dies? Probably hit 100.0 chapters." There was laughter. Leah kept her eyes on the screen. Later that night, She redrew her trim profile and moved the nozzle onset timing by 2 seconds. The simulation held. The whiteboard by her desk had been wiped clean 3 times that month by custodial error. She rewrote the data each time from memory. She didn't complain. Instead, she started copying the values onto permanent paper stock and storing the sheets in plastic sleeves in the side panel of her gear case. The tablet beeped once. Another descent simulation completed. 88.2. She exhaled, pushed her chair back, and walked across the bay to stretch. Her boots echoed faintly in the otherwise empty room. On the far wall, she kept a taped-up series of old screenshots. Not for nostalgia, she used them to track failure patterns over time. They showed where the software lost throttle control. She had highlighted those moments with green circles. Green meant fixable. The temperature in the room stayed steady, regulated by the same system that cooled the avionics racks. Most people found it too dry. She found it calming. At night, with no background chatter, she could finish 3 full sequences in under an hour. On her best run, she simulated 5 successful hovers with full thrust loss. She marked that day with a note on the underside of her keyboard. No one else would see it. That was fine. She once overheard a lieutenant say she was just an admin who never stopped pretending she had wings. It didn't bother her. She didn't need wings. She needed margin. She needed to solve the problem no one else wanted to admit existed. On another evening, just before shutdown, she stood again at the edge of the pad. The glass canopies of the jets shimmered in the orange light. The HUDs inside, some of them still blinked through their startup routines. She noted 2 flickers and a lagged fan sync. No one was watching. She still made the entries. When the bay finally powered down, she reset the board, packed her tablet, and turned off the last terminal by hand. The cooling fans began to spin down. As the lights dimmed, she stepped outside and paused at the threshold. Above her, the sky was clear and quiet. The jets were silent now. Their noise traded for a calm wind that carried across the cement and into the trees. In her notebook, she'd already logged every anomaly. Nothing slipped through. Nothing went unrecorded. It was all there captured long before anyone thought to ask. The warning tone cut through the operations tent like a blade. Sharp, repeating, insistent. On the main screen, a flight marker blinked red above a strip of jungle ridgeline. The F-35B on station had aborted mid-pattern. Static hissed from the comms panel as officers leaned in, overlapping their commands, trying to make sense of conflicting data. One voice broke through the noise, raw and urgent. They're pinned. Danger close. We need air support now. The forward observer feed cut in and out, stuttering between angles. One frame caught a curl of black smoke rising from the canopy below, too close to the Marine's last known position. A technician confirmed what everyone feared: both cleared aircraft were unavailable. One was grounded for diagnostics. The other had diverted north an hour earlier. In the diagnostics bay, Leah froze mid-entry. She heard the call echo through the overhead speaker: danger close. No assets available. The aircraft next to her, Echo 5, still sat warm from post-test fueling. The canopy was closed, systems idle, avionics cold. No assignment posted. The glass on the jet's nose still carried a fine film of condensation. It was her old airframe. She stepped to the side panel and keyed the override. Her voice came through steady and calm. I can take it. For a beat, the channel stayed quiet. Then voices rushed to fill the space. Say again negative. No cleared pilot. One came louder than the rest, clipped with disbelief. She's diagnostics. She doesn't fly. Leah didn't argue. If you wait, they'll die. In the operations tent, no one moved. Then, as if passed silently between hands, a decision reached the right console. A clearance key turned. A light flipped green. She was already walking. Her gloves were out, pulled tight and clipped down as she crossed the line to the bird. The pad wind stirred dust into spirals behind her boots. A crewman stood frozen near the ladder, uncertain whether to intervene. He didn't. Leah climbed. Inside the cockpit, her movements were smooth, unhurried, familiar. The HUD flickered during boot. She ignored it and toggled to manual. Her personal trim curve loaded from a hidden partition on the startup menu. The controls responded with a stiffness she'd anticipated. She adjusted the yoke, ran diagnostics by touch, skipped every non-essential prompt. Outside, tower clearance came through. Echo 5. You are cleared hot. No one said her name. The lift was rough, wind bouncing her off vertical, but she stabilized fast. Thrust held through the arc as she cleared the far end of the pad and banked south. Jungle canopy stretched in ridged bands below, broken by smoke and the blinking marker of the embedded ground team. Radio calls crackled in her ears, most too jumbled to decode. Echo 5. Confirm heading. Someone called out. 280, she replied. On station in 90 seconds. At 1,200 feet, the throttle response began to freeze. Lag built quickly. She tried to reset the input. Nothing. It locked at 68.0 and held. She kept her voice steady. Throttle degraded. Switching control method. A pause. Then copy. Echo 5. We're routing you to stand by. She didn't respond. There wasn't time. Below, muzzle flashes stitched light through the treetops. The forward observer's voice returned. Faster now. I've got wounded. Requesting immediate release. This is danger close. Please confirm. Leah dropped low, guiding descent by trim and nozzle alone. HUD still flickering. She shut it down entirely. The canopy glass fogged faintly from heat and stress. She adjusted pitch by feel. Arming manually, she said. She didn't ask permission. The target zone came into view through a gap in the ridge. She adjusted elevation by 6 degrees, waited 2 more seconds, then released. The jungle flared with impact. No one spoke. She pulled up hard, but there was no thrust feedback. The jet fought her. She rechanneled airflow, rerouted fan distribution, and toggled vertical hold. For 1 long second, nothing responded. Then the vent nozzles caught and pushed air just enough to stabilize her angle. Echo 5, do you copy? Someone whispered into her headset. She didn't answer immediately. She was busy keeping the aircraft from falling. She found a clearing near the ridge barely wide enough to call a pad. Wind kicked dust into rings. She hovered low, nose high, fighting the imbalance of weight and residual thrust. Landing gear made contact. Hard, but she held. Target neutralized, she said at last. The line stayed quiet. Then we see you. Echo 5, you're on deck. Inside the cockpit, Leah's gloves were soaked through. Her arms didn't shake. She powered down the manual systems in silence and waited for the canopy to cool. Outside, a medevac team scrambled past her wing toward the smoke. She didn't call for extraction. She sat with her hands still on the controls, eyes fixed ahead, breathing shallow. The flicker on the HUD was gone now. The jet was still. No one had asked her to fly. She had done it anyway. Leah cleared the ridge at full climb, the jet straining as she pitched for altitude. The throttle was already resisting. She could feel it thickening in her grip, feedback lagging, the response curling inward like wet grit in a dry gear train. She pressed through it. There was no surprise in it now. This was the moment she had rehearsed in silence, mapped on notepads, sketched across whiteboards while others passed her by. Inside the cockpit, the HUD blinked with a diagonal flicker, green bars jittering left and right. She toggled it off. Dark glass filled her vision. Outside, the horizon bent as she turned east, jungle ridgeline flattening beneath her into ribbons of treetop and haze. Somewhere inside that canopy, the Marines were boxed in, caught under fire. No satellite overlay showed it. Only the radio call confirmed it. Their last known position sat near the tree split just past the second ridge. Echo 5, confirm status, came a clipped voice. She didn't reply. Her hands were already setting trim. She rolled the aircraft into a steep descent, nose down, wings firm. The jet hesitated at first, then followed as she guided it through its own resistance. Gravity did the work. She just pointed the blade. Air pressure built around the frame. The cockpit glass began to sweat from heat shift and engine soak. Moisture pooled at the base of the canopy. She didn't wipe it. The glare faded as the light dimmed near the valley floor. Through the mist, black smoke rose in fingers. Thin, then thicker. She used them to mark distance. A faint orange blink caught her eye muzzle fire against foliage. Then more. The entire tree line flashed in rhythm. The forward observer's voice returned, broken by static and movement. 30 meters from our line. You drop wide. We're gone. Leah adjusted pitch by 1 degree, toggled her backup visual grid, and fed range into her override. The throttle was dead now, stuck at 68.0. Useless. She rerouted airflow manually, leaned forward, and prepped her release. No software targeting, no beep, no calculated drift. The red button glowed in the lower left panel. It was a backup for emergencies rarely touched, never tested this way. She had practiced it hundreds of times in the dark. Below her, the ridge broke into a clearing. Just past it, the tree line shifted in strange patterns. Camouflage nets, defensive nests. This was the point of no return. She keyed the comm, arming manually. Hold position. The observer's voice came low. We trust you. At 500 feet, the descent was near vertical. Leah used terrain to accelerate, controlling only by trim. The jet bucked once, dipped left. She countered. Airframe strain echoed through her seat. She sighted the safe corridor, the one she had memorized from map overlays and instinct. A 30-meter band that was too narrow, too choked with error. She kept to it anyway. At 200 feet, she hit the release. The J-dams dropped clean. She flared left instantly, cutting trim and letting wind pull her out of the fire path. No smoke, yet only pressure. The cockpit shook as the sound wave caught her. Then fire rolled across the canopy. The tree line exploded behind her. Orange and gray roared upward. A gust slapped the rear of the jet, pushing it forward into instability. Comms went silent. She didn't wait for confirmation. She was already fighting to keep the airframe in play. With no thrust modulation, hover recovery depended entirely on vector control. She set crosswind angle by hand, routed bypass to side intakes, and disabled pitch assist. The jet trembled under her. Her gloves left sweat marks on the yoke. Altitude dropped fast. She corrected. Rear vents opened late but held. She bled velocity with minor flares, bouncing between drag moments, staying upright through balance and airflow alone. It felt like surfing a fault line. At 300 feet, she spotted a patch beyond the ridge. Dirt, uneven, sloped to the left, but possible. She aimed. The F-35B shook again as she tilted for descent. Manual trim only now. The flight computer wasn't reading vertical correction. She used the pedals for yaw and leaned forward to stabilize pitch. Everything resisted. 90 feet. She feathered downward with final balance adjustments. 40 feet. Wind gusted crosswise. She countered and held. Landing gear extended. 15 feet. She cut lift. The impact hit hard. Right gear caught first, then the rest. The frame bounced once, then settled with a thud. She locked brakes. The entire jet stilled. For a moment, all sound disappeared. The HUD remained dark. Her gloves were tight on the controls. The air inside the cockpit was thick with residual heat and breath fog. She didn't move, didn't speak. The radio chirped once, then a voice. Echo 5, do you copy? She keyed in. Target neutralized, landing achieved, no further movement. There was a pause, then a softer voice followed. We see you. You're good. We're inbound. She sat still, hands fixed. Her breath finally slowed. Beyond the canopy, the tree line still burned. She had no applause, no call sign, no echo of recognition. Only the tremble in her arms from the effort, and the faint glow of the manual buttons still lit red on the console. Everything she had trained for had come down to this moment. There had been no backup, no failsafe, and she had made it hold. The hatch opened with a soft hiss. Heat struck first dense, sun-baked air pressing in as the canopy seal broke. Leah stepped down the ladder slowly, one hand still on the side rail. Her boots touched the tarmac with full weight, each movement precise. The flight line was quiet now. Engines powered down, rotors still. A handful of crew stood nearby in a rough arc, but no one moved. No one spoke. She unlatched her gloves and pulled them free. The fingers held for a second before peeling loose. She folded them carefully across her lap as she sat on the skid rail of the jet, elbows resting on her knees, head slightly bowed. The sweat at her collarbone cooled in the open air. The scent of jet fuel lingered faintly in the heat. Behind her, the F-35B shimmered with the residual haze of post-flight. The canopy was fogged inside. Through the blurred glass, one red light still glowed in the lower left of the cockpit manual release armed. It pulsed faintly against the dimmed controls. No warnings, no klaxons, just the hush of a machine waiting to shut down. In the tower above, the footage had already started circulating. Officers leaned in around the main screen as someone replayed the dive from 3 camera angles. They watched the drop, the flare, the final hover. When the jet landed, the playback paused. The red glow from the cockpit was visible even through dust and exhaust blur. The moment held. A junior pilot stepped forward, the same one who had joked before. He watched the impact frame twice, lips parted slightly. "How did she stay in the air?" he asked. No one answered. On the flight line, Leah remained still. Her gloves stayed folded. A slight breeze carried fine grit across the pad, whispering against her boots. The crew didn't scatter. No jokes passed between them. No glances away. Inside the tower, another officer tapped back the timeline and paused it again right at the manual flare. The trim angle was visible. No autocorrection. No assist. Just muscle memory and flight physics. The final radio call echoed faintly through the tower speaker, her voice stripped of ceremony, steady as always. Target neutralized. Landing achieved. Still, her name wasn't said. Leah stood at last, folding her gloves once more and holding them at her side. She turned toward the hangar without hesitation. The crew stepped back to give her room. No salutes, no applause. Just a path cleared in silence. Above, the sky was a pale wash of heat. One transport jet trailed vapor near the horizon, high and slow. Behind her, the aircraft stood still. No call sign was spoken. No orders followed. But for the first time, no one looked away. There was no medal, no speech, no nameplate added to the jet she landed against physics, fire, and silence. But the footage played on loop in the tower, the red glow of her manual override, the stillness after the dive, the pilot who once mocked her. He couldn't explain how she'd stayed in the air. And Leah never answered. She didn't need recognition, just a chance. And when it came, when no one else could rise, she was already ready. If this story stayed with you, if Leah's silence said something louder than words, consider subscribing for more true-to-heart military stories like this one. Leave a comment below. We read everyone. And if you believe preparation matters more than praise, give this video a like. It tells the algorithm what we already know. Quiet strength deserves to be seen.